would be completely justified if you were sitting there thinking, chipper readings, Morita. Those are some really hard stories to hear. The Bible is not all happy-go-lucky. The Bible has some stuff in it. And sometimes we need to think about the stuff because some of it sounds familiar. Some of it might even be similar to something we've experienced. I very purposely today wanted to start with a story from about 30 years ago. Oh my gosh, I'm old. I graduated from Oklahoma City University. I'd moved to Kansas. I went back to watch some friends of mine graduate from the same school a year later. And after the ceremonies, we went to a restaurant in Bricktown, I think Old Town, Omaha. And we were in this really busy restaurant surrounded by tables that were filled with what I've come to call the alphabet people. Men and women in blue jackets, emblazoned with letters like DEA, FBI, ATF, and others. As we were dining, there was a young person who was bussing tables, and he had one of those gray bins like we have back by our dishwasher, and it was filled with plates and glasses and silverware. And as he was walking towards the kitchen, he dropped it, quite by accident. And you can imagine the sound that it made, and nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. Not one person let out a single peep. And in that moment, I understood what my friends in Oklahoma City had been living through since April 19th, just 2 weeks before that event. They were wondering, what next? What next thing is the next loud sound going to represent? And later that night, I traveled with my friends to the site where the Murrah building had stood just 2 weeks before. And I listened to my friends talk about where they had been that day, what they had done, and what they had seen. One in particular who graduated that weekend worked across the street at the First United Methodist Church in Oklahoma City that had become a temporary morgue during those days. My friends had seen a lot. 5 years later, I went back to Oklahoma City when the memorial was dedicated. And as I was walking around the chairs, the 168 chairs, and as I saw the survivor tree that had survived the blast and was thriving, I became aware of a man who was standing nearby describing where he had been that day 5 years earlier. He was a retired Air Force officer. He was one who had heard the distress calls at Tinker Air Force Base, and he brought his team to begin digging through the rubble. And as I listened to him and a small crowd gathered around him, I knew as he told it, he could still see it. And after he told his story, he ended with a lament that everyone had been thanked. The police, the firefighters, the EMTs, the highway patrol, the federal workers, and the blue jackets with the alphabet. Everyone had been thanked except the military. This man felt like his efforts had gone unseen. And so as I stood there listening, I wiped tears from my eyes and I said to him, on behalf of an Oklahoman who could not be here in those days, thank you. And we both wiped tears from our eyes. I saw him later in the afternoon, and he was surrounded by a new group of people. And once again, he was repeating the mantra of what he had seen, what he had done, what he had recognized that day. And he came to the end and he said, and everybody got thanked, the military, or the police and the fire. And he stopped and he said, up until today, I've always been able to say I was never thanked, but today I was thanked. One piece of his trauma he could let go of. In the next couple of weeks, People who were alive at the time are going to remember where they were 30 years ago when the news broke about an explosion in downtown Oklahoma City. News specials have already begun to air interviews with survivors and family members. And the other night I was flipping channels and I came across an interview with a woman I recognized. She lost 2 young sons that day. Her hair is no longer the beautiful shade of red it was in 1995. She's aged, her face has lines, but she's found a way to live. But the pain in her eyes was recognizable. And I know the trauma will be with her for the rest of her days. Of course it will. Trauma is a hard word to consider on Sunday morning, right? We're supposed to be about light and love and everybody is getting along, but the truth is, trauma is all around us. The history of our nation contains some trauma. The history of Omaha has trauma. We all have trauma in our lives, and so it's hard for us to think about, and yet we have to in order to understand how we open ourselves up so that all know they belong. So those snippets of stories we heard this morning from the Gospel of Luke and from the Hebrew Bible, they're all about trauma, and frankly, the Bible is filled with traumatic stories. If you remember from Luke, in Jesus' day, people were wondering how they could reconcile the story of good people whose deaths were ordered to be carried out while they were doing their duty in the temple, making sacrifices. In essence, they wanted to know why bad things happened to good people, and we still ask that question. But they also wanted to know, what did these people do that was so wrong that they were punished in this way? Because sometimes we do that to people. We think, oh, they did something to deserve what happened to them. You know what? They didn't. And we can't let ourselves get caught in that. And then there's that story of Naomi and Ruth. And Naomi had lost her husband and her only 2 sons. They were gone, and she returned home with this daughter-in-law that she didn't really want tagging along with her because that was something she didn't need, was one more thing to worry about. And so when she got home to Bethlehem, people didn't recognize her, and she said, my life is so bad, I'm changing my name because of all that's happened. So don't call me Naomi, call me bitter. Oh, she'd had some trauma, and she was not ready to walk away from it. It was too painful. It was too much. And then we have the saga of Joseph and his brothers that takes place over 13 chapters in the book of Genesis. You need to read it sometime in its entirety. We just heard a small portion of it when the brothers plot to make him disappear. And did you notice that it was, let's not just leave him in the pit. Let's make a little bit of money off of this. Let's sell him. Let's sell our brother into slavery. So not only was he attacked and stripped and dropped into a pit, then they pulled him back up and sold him off. His story of trauma is one that requires our attention. So it might be a stretch, and you may want to argue with me that you haven't known trauma in your life, and so I can appreciate that, but what if we change the word to shock or suffering or distress? Maybe that feels more familiar. In the book Cherished Belonging, Gregory Boyle writes about the importance of recognizing our trauma, whether it's individual, whether it's shared, whether it's a communal trauma of our people. He suggests that with trauma, our executive function shuts down and fear sets in. And what happens when we try to sidestep trauma or pretend it didn't happen or it doesn't hurt? Then it only gets bigger. It's more prominent. And it comes out in other ways, unexpected ways. Our functioning in the world, at work, in our families, with our friends, at school, with our faith community, it's all impacted when we try to push that aside, our hurt. Sidestepping it leads to no stepping it. We just miss out. So Boyle wrote a mantra that I just love. It called to me as I was reading. He said, we don't have enemies, we have injuries. We don't have hate, we have wounds. And we don't have fear, we have a shared common human brokenness. Naomi didn't have enemies. She had a source of injury in her heart. The ones who asked Jesus about the ones who were killed were reminded that they were feeling less grounded. They shouldn't be feeling grounded in hate or feeling lesser. It was just their woundedness that was showing and wondering, how can people do this to one another? And Joseph's saga is all about the brokenness we find in life. Not that it can be neatly tied up into one short timeline. You see, trauma is complicated. It affects each person differently. So if we're going to create a place of belonging, a place that welcomes all, we can't just say that. It has to have room for those who are standing or living in trauma. And our welcome has to be wide enough so that those who are living in trauma can know that they have found a place to heal and move forward, or stay where they are for a while. We're going to love you wherever you are. Boyle says we should create what he calls a wraparound place. A place that we know that you are going to be surrounded with love, with arms, with understanding, with peace, with quiet. A wraparound church. Oh, doesn't that sound glorious? Let's wrap around one another. So what do we learn from these stories that we heard today? Our trauma is not related to what we deserve or don't deserve. Trauma happens. And this is going to be an example I didn't think I'd use, but when I came over the crest of a hill and there were 3 deer standing in my lane and they had no intention of moving, and I closed my eyes and hoped for the best, I didn't ask for that to happen. But every time I passed that place in the road for about 2 years, I would honk to make sure the deer knew I was coming. I didn't deserve to hit them. They didn't deserve to get hit. It just happened. But I was traumatized by that place in the road, thinking to myself that was always where something was going to happen. It's not about what we deserve or don't deserve. I wasn't a worse sinner because I hit 3 deer. It happens. And we walk together when those moments happen. We also learned from Naomi that we need to look for the places where we can sense or see some of the normal. Now, if you're walking or living in trauma, maybe nothing feels normal. Maybe nothing feels right. But if we read the entire story of Ruth and Naomi, we begin to see how Naomi, or bitter, begins to check back into her life. She begins to offer Ruth advice about, well, maybe you should try this, or if you go and work with the owner of this field. She began to re-enter her life, so that when her daughter-in-law Ruth gave birth to her first son, she said, he brings me more joy than 7 sons. She re-entered her life in her time. We look for the places where we can see some of the normal of everyday living. And then Joseph reminds us, even when we're standing or living in trauma, know who you are. Know what your gifts are. You may not be able to act on them in the moment, but never forget who you are. Joseph's brothers were mad at him because he could interpret dreams, and they didn't come out looking too good in most of his dreams. And when he was sold into slavery, it was his ability to interpret dreams that got the attention of his captors that raised him into freedom and eventually leadership in Egypt. Because he never forgot who he was. He never forgot that he had that ability, which is why we heard from Genesis 50:20, what he said to his brothers when they eventually came back together. He didn't say, I'm going to get you, and boy, are you guys in trouble. He said, you meant it for evil, but God used it for good. God is always at work in our lives, even when we can't see it, even when we can't feel it. So in each of these stories that we read, the people described break into what Boyle calls collective living. They return to their life. It may be different. It may not look the same. It may include bittersweet memories. There may be anniversary dates that cause us to catch our breath, like April 19th, September 11th, December 7th. Places in the journey, the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. There are those dates that are always going to make us pay attention. There are places in the journey where we stop to consider a memory, but we keep a place in our hearts for those moments. They are a part of us, part of the tapestry of who we are, stitches in the quilt that is part of being in a wraparound place. I don't know your trauma, and you don't know mine. And we may never fully know, but in creating a place of belonging, we start by acknowledging there's pain. We treat one another as those who are cherished because we know there's a pain we may never see. We walk more carefully. We speak words kindly. We listen with holy ears. We reach out. We exercise patience until someone is ready to share their story. And if they're never ready to share their story, we exercise more and more patience. We make a place where there is safety in telling our stories, and there's safety in not telling our stories. And in all of it, we tell people, you belong. We trust that. And in that, we strive to live in the example of Jesus, who on the precipice of undocumented trauma, unprecedented trauma for he and his followers, he set a table. He set a place of calm. He set something familiar. He set a wraparound place in an upper room where even one who would betray him, even one who would deny him, even all those who would run away knew they were invited, welcomed, and loved. We set the table today in that same spirit. Would you open?